Hello everyone, I'm back. Hope you all behaved while I was away. I just wanted to make a quick video to chat about the Break the Ice event, which is starting in just a few hours. First things first, quick note on the material farm. You can farm alloy cubes, grindstones, and polyester, the first two of which are in quite high demand as far as tier 3 materials go. However, you should be focusing on the grindstones because alloys will be in the next event as well for the Who Is Real rerun. So focus on farming those grindstones for now, and then you can farm alloy cubes in the next event. Of course, if you need some alloy cubes right now, feel free. The drop rate is fine. Break the Ice is a medium difficulty event, but it is quite fun. The main challenge in this event is really just the boss, but not too bad. Do bring some pusher units. They are very fun to use in this event. My main focus in this video is talking about GNOSIS and why he is so great and why I highly recommend pulling for him. I will be pulling for him myself. If you've ever watched me stream Arknights CN content, you've almost certainly seen me use him. He's one of my favorite units, one of my most used units on my CN account. He was the first new unit I pulled for once I got my CN account. He's incredibly fun. He's a very rewarding character to use properly. Speaking of pulls, I will be streaming my pulls as well as any viewer pulls for GNOSIS tomorrow after work, so about 20 hours from the release of this video, and then streaming the event, of course. So do feel free to come and join, whether you want me to do some viewer pulls with you or you'd just like to watch. Be glad to have you there. So, about GNOSIS, he's a supporter with a specialty in CC and debuffing the enemy. The fragile effect he applies is the strongest in the game. So cold targets within range get a 25% fragile, frozen targets get a 50% fragile. So it's definitely the strongest fragile in the game. Of course, there aren't as many targets that can be frozen as, say, Suzerain's ultimate, which makes it a bit more difficult to apply against key targets. However, his focus is not so much on boss killing, although more on that later. His is mainly on dealing with key elite enemies as well as crowds of enemies. He also has the option to do mass AoE CC. You can either go for a long, stronger CC, or you can go for a shorter but more frequent CC, which is two fantastic options. And then his other passive, which gives Karlan operators CC resistance after 10 seconds, so that's 50% duration on CC, is really good because usually faction stuff is not that great. However, Karlan operators include the likes of Silver Ash, so you are giving buffs to some very strong units and making them even better. He's got two main skills. We'll start with skill 3, which is similar to Angelina's skill 3. However, instead of applying a slow, it's applying a cold into a rapid freeze, and then once the skill ends, all frozen enemies shatter for a solid amount of damage. As I said with his fragile, if the enemy can't be frozen, then it's not as strong. However, when the enemies can be frozen, it is stronger than Angelina's skill 3. It's a pretty straightforward, simple ability to use. However, my preferred skill, and what I think is GNOSIS's best skill, is skill 2. Because with Mastery, you have a 6-second cooldown or 12-second overcharge on an AoE cold, on a regular cast, or an AoE freeze on an overcharge cast. The way to use this skill really well is if you're dealing with one target in particular, just use the regular cast and time it with his auto attack. So as his auto attack is flying through the air, cast the skill and both abilities will land at the same time and freeze the target. If you're dealing with a crowd of enemies that you need to freeze at once, then let it overcharge. 12 seconds is a very short recharge time, and this is before applying any other kind of buffs to speed up the SP charge. And you will find yourself constantly CCing large groups of enemies and applying a significant fragile debuff. He makes it so easy to deal with crowds of enemies. And this is before we apply any outside support to buff up his SP recharge, because that's where it starts to get absolutely insane. His only weakness, really, is enemies that are immune to freeze. Now, there are very few regular or elite enemies that are immune to freeze. It's usually just the bosses. When you go up against a boss that is not immune to freeze, you realize just how overpowered he would be if bosses were vulnerable to freeze with GNOSIS on the field. However, there are some bosses that are vulnerable to freeze, including main bosses in some upcoming events. So speaking of upcoming events, GNOSIS is an absolute monster in integrated strategies too. definitely one of the best 6 stars in the game for that mode. If you just get 1 or 2 attack speed items, he will attack so fast that he will freeze enemies on his own auto attacks. That means any enemy, which is almost every enemy except for the final boss in a run, that is vulnerable to freeze will just be constantly frozen if he's attacking them. It makes him absolutely ridiculous. And then on top of that, if you have any SP charge artifacts to make him cast his skill 2 on overcharge every couple of seconds, then he's applying AoE freeze and vulnerability non-stop. It's ridiculous how strong he is in that game mode. Cannot recommend him enough. He is definitely one of my go-to units for integrated strategies too. He's also excellent in Invitation to Wine, where you've got these little talismans that you have to kill after you kill enemies. I'm going to avoid giving away too much for upcoming events, just in case you haven't watched my streams or somebody else's streams. But the core mechanic of Invitation to Wine is that when enemies die, they break up into these little talismans that are useless but unblockable enemies that just head for the exit. And they do cause leaks if you let them through, and you just need to hit them a few times to get rid of them. And different talismans have different requirements for destroying them, different number of hits as well. And some of them can only be damaged by arts damage. And he's really good at not just hitting lots of talismans at once, but also freezing in place the ones that need to be hit by arts damage quite a number of times. Then Stultifera Navis, the limited event featuring Unchained Spectre. He is by far the best unit in that game mode. I don't want to give away too much, but let's just say he hard counters the boss so bad that frankly he should have been banned against that boss. He's also good in the new game mode just recently released in China, where you get the items to upgrade modules. Because in that you can feed him snipers to increase his attack speed to a point where he attacks fast enough to freeze enemies on his own auto attacks. Basically, any situation where Gnosis either has an increase in SP charge or enough of an increase in his attack speed, he becomes absolutely busted because he just permanently CCs enemies. These days, it seems like every event has some kind of mechanic to boost Gnosis's capabilities. And then even in regular play, there are very few units that can match him in dealing with crowds of enemies, especially at an ongoing and sustained rate because of how short his cooldowns are. If you've used Angelina with her skill 3, you'll know what that feels like. Now just imagine that, but even stronger. So yes, Gnosis is fantastic. Not only that, he's just a cool dude. I love his voice, I love his design. He's got an awesome vampire Dracula looking skin coming out. Yeah, I can't recommend him enough. I think he's an incredibly cool character. Between Neolite and the upcoming Invitation to Wine, he's the only new 6-star releasing, so you'll most likely have some pulls to spare. The only difficulty is that the next limited unit is Ling, who is the strongest of all upcoming units, so she should be a priority. If you're really desperate for pulls, then you can possibly skip him. This event will rerun because it is a full story event, and you could also just wait for him to release on a good standard banner. So if you have to skip him, then it's not the end of the world, but if you can go for him, I highly recommend it. After Ling, I would say he's the second highest priority upcoming 6-star. And then I would probably put, honestly, more and more. Golden Glow has gone up and up in my estimation as I've used her more and more, especially in later game modes. But that's a discussion for another video. Now, I know I'll get questions about Aurora. Is it worth pulling just for Aurora? Aurora hits like an absolute truck. She hits really, 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 really hard as long as the enemy's frozen. The problem with Aurora is she's terrible at freezing enemies. So Aurora is great if you combine her with the rest of the freeze team of Gnosis and Chiara. Gnosis is the most important one. Chiara, I don't think is enough. You have to have Gnosis at least. Ideally, you want Gnosis and Chiara together, and then Aurora can do a ridiculous amount of damage. But again, Aurora has the same weakness that Gnosis does, which is if the enemy is immune to freeze, then you aren't going to get that massive bonus. However, unlike Gnosis, if the enemy is immune to freeze, then Aurora is very weak by comparison, whereas Gnosis still does plenty of great things outside of that. As for Chiara, the welfare 5-star drone caster, she's easily one of the strongest free units in the game. She's not just good for a free unit, she's good for any unit. Highly recommend building her. She's the 5-star click. I would say she's stronger than click, and she combos particularly well with the likes of GNOSIS. Though of course, if you've already got click built, then you don't really need Chiara that badly. Before I let you go, on another note, it's good to see the Christmas login bonus is releasing for us now, rather than at the end of the year, unlike what happened with the grey skin, where we had to wait 6 extra months so that it would line up as our New Year/Christmas login bonus, which was a delay of 6 months compared to the release in China. So it's good that they're not bothering with that delay. It feels a little bit awkward, even though the skin, the skin is Christmas themed, but you don't want to have to wait an extra 6 months just so that it fits the time of year. So it's good to see that early. Also, Dual Strike Guards and Charger Vanguards are getting their modules. Bagpipes module is one of the best in the game, so I highly recommend building that one early. Prioritize that if you are at the stage of making modules. Alright, that's it for me, guys. I need to go back and finish watching Spy Family. I'm almost done. About 3 episodes to go. I'll probably be talking on stream. If not, I'll talk it on the weekend stream. Speaking of, I'll be streaming in about 20 hours or so from the release of this video, with Break the Ice and the GNOSIS pulls, including viewer pulls, so do come and join me. I'd love to have you there. See you soon.